The last thing my mother ever said to me was, "I love you, Michael." She said it the way she always said it, quietly, like it was a fact she had long since stopped needing to announce. Like the sun rising. Like the seasons. Permanent. Unshakable. She hugged me at the door of her house on a Sunday afternoon in October, and I drove home thinking nothing had changed. I was wrong about that. I was wrong about almost everything I thought I knew about my mother, about our family, and about the 62 years she had lived before I came into the world. And it would take her death, a stranger's name on a legal document, and a gray shoebox pushed to the back of a closet shelf to show me just how much I had never been allowed to see. Before we go deeper into this story, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to hear from you. And do not forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Here is what I need you to understand before we go any further. My mother, Patricia and Mercer, was not a complicated woman. She was not a woman who lived on the edge or courted drama or kept secrets the way some people keep collections. Lovingly, deliberately, proudly. She was a schoolteacher from Columbus, Ohio, who made pot roast on Sundays and called me every week without fail and cried at Hallmark commercials. She was the most ordinary, steady, reliable woman I have ever known in my life. And that is exactly what made what I found so impossible to accept. Because somewhere inside that ordinary, steady woman was a secret so enormous, so carefully buried, so completely sealed away from the people who loved her most, that it could only find its way out of her after she was gone. And when it came out, it did not come out gently. It came out like a fault line breaking. There are 3 questions at the center of this story, and I want to be honest with you. It took me the better part of a year to find the answers to all 3. The first question is this: who was Diane Holloway of Memphis, Tennessee, and why did my mother leave her every single thing she owned? The second question is darker and harder. Why did Patricia change her will just 6 months before she died, in secret, without telling her own children? And the third question is the one that I still think about when I cannot sleep. What had my mother been carrying inside her for over 40 years? What was the weight that she never once put down, never once shared, never once gave any of us the chance to help her carry? Those 3 questions are what drove me for 12 months after I stood in that attorney's parking lot and sat in my car for 45 minutes because I could not make myself drive away. My mother was born Patricia Ann Morrison in Columbus, Ohio, in 1944. She was the second of 3 children born to Robert and Evelyn Morrison, a working-class couple who attended First Methodist Church every Sunday and believed in hard work, quiet dignity, and the kind of respectability that required constant maintenance. My grandfather Robert worked at a tire factory for 31 years. My grandmother Evelyn kept the house, raised the children, and ran the household with the kind of firm, loving efficiency that made everything look easy and gave no one permission to fall apart. Patricia grew up in that house on Delmont Avenue, a narrow 2-story with a chain-link fence and a backyard maple that she told me about so many times I felt like I had climbed it myself. She talked about that backyard. She talked about that maple. She almost never talked about anything else from those years. She was, by every account I have gathered from people who knew her then, a bright and quiet girl. Her teachers said she was focused. Her neighbors said she was polite. The woman who lived next door to my grandparents for 40 years, a woman named Mrs. Calloway, who is now in her late 80s and still lives 2 blocks from where she always did, told me that Patricia Morrison was the kind of girl who seemed, even at a young age, like she was carrying more than she let on. She had old eyes, Mrs. Calloway told me. Even when she smiled, there was something behind it that never quite left. At the time I heard that, I thought it was just the observation of an old woman romanticizing a memory. Now I think Mrs. Calloway saw something the rest of us missed entirely, something the rest of us were never given the chance to look for because we never knew there was anything to find. Patricia graduated high school in 1962. She was 17 years old, sharp and capable, and she enrolled that fall at Ohio State University with the intention of studying education. She wanted to be a teacher. She had always wanted to be a teacher. It was the one thing she talked about with something that looked like pure joy, unguarded and bright. The idea of standing in front of a classroom of 3rd graders and helping them understand that the world was a place worth being curious about. That dream never left her. She went on to teach 3rd grade for 31 years at Garfield Elementary in Westerville, Ohio, and every single parent of every single student who passed through her classroom will tell you the same thing. She was the kind of teacher you remember for the rest of your life. The kind who makes you feel seen. The kind who tells you that you are capable of more than you think, and somehow makes you believe it. She became that teacher. But before she did, in the year between her graduation and her enrollment at Ohio State, something happened that she never told a single person who came after it. She told no one. Not my father. Not her sister. Not her two brothers. Not her closest friend, a woman named Deborah, who had known her since the 5th grade. Not my sister Karen. And not me. For 60 years, Patricia and Morrison Mercer carried one of the most profound, most painful experiences a young woman can carry, in complete and total silence, with nothing to show for it except a shoebox pushed to the back of a closet shelf and a first name. Just a first name, whispered in letters she wrote and never sent. According to researchers who have studied this period of American history extensively, Patricia was far from alone. Between the late 1940s and the early 1970s, a period that sociologists and adoption historians now call the baby scoop era, an estimated 1.5 million American women surrendered newborns for adoption, the vast majority of them not by choice, but by pressure. Social pressure. Family pressure. The pressure of a society that had no framework for unmarried motherhood and no mercy for women who failed to meet its expectations. These women went home empty-handed and were told, explicitly and repeatedly, to move on, to forget, to carry on as though it had never happened. Almost none of them ever did. Patricia met my father, James Mercer, in the fall of 1964. She was 20 years old. He was 23, recently returned from a 2-year stint in the Army, working at his uncle's hardware store while he figured out what came next. By every account, including their own, it was a straightforward love story. He was steady and dependable, the kind of man who meant what he said and said what he meant. She was warm and focused, the kind of woman who made a house feel like a home without appearing to try. They married in June of 1966. I was born in 1968. My sister Karen came 2 years later, in 1970. And for the next 5 decades, we were, to all appearances, a perfectly ordinary American family. Sunday dinners. Church on major holidays. Summer road trips in a Ford station wagon that smelled like vinyl and whatever snack my mother had packed for the drive. I look back at my childhood now, and I do not see the lie of omission in it. I see a woman who loved us completely and genuinely and without reservation, and who had, somewhere behind all of that love, a wound so old and so deep that she had simply learned to carry it as part of herself. The way you learn to carry an injury that never fully healed but that you stopped expecting to. The fall that changed everything was the fall Patricia turned 73. She had been in good health, the kind of stubborn, steady health that made her seem like she would simply continue indefinitely, like a river. She still drove. She still gardened. She still called me every Sunday at noon without fail, and if I missed the call, she would leave a voicemail that was always exactly the same. "It's your mother. Just checking in. Call me when you get a chance, sweetheart." And I always called back. That autumn, she had a fall in her kitchen. She stepped wrong coming off the back porch and fractured her hip. Surgery followed. Recovery followed. And what followed the recovery was a quietness in her that I noticed but could not name. She was slower, more internal. The Sunday calls got shorter. When I drove down to see her in November, she seemed like a woman who was working something out in her mind that she had no intention of sharing. Her doctor attributed it to post-surgical adjustment and mild depression, both of which are, I have since learned, extremely common in older adults following a major orthopedic injury. I accepted that explanation because I wanted to, and because the alternative, that something was actually wrong, was not something I was prepared to look at directly. That was my failure. I own it. But it does not belong only to me. My mother died on a Tuesday morning in the 3rd week of November. My sister Karen was with her. I was 42 minutes away when Karen called. I drove the whole way with the phone on the passenger seat, and by the time I pulled into the driveway, it was already over. Patricia had passed quietly, in her own bedroom, in the bed she had slept in for 30 years. The hospice nurse said it had been peaceful. I stood in the doorway of her room for a long time before I could make myself go in. I want to tell you that I had a sense, in that moment, of something unresolved, some intuition that there were things left unsaid, a chapter still open. But the truth is I felt nothing like that. I felt only grief, clean and uncomplicated, the way grief feels when you believe you understood the person you lost. That understanding was about to be taken apart piece by piece. 11 days after the funeral, I received a call from a man named Gerald Harmon. He identified himself as an estate attorney and said he had been retained by Patricia Mercer to manage her estate, and that he was prepared to schedule a reading of her will at my earliest convenience. I told him Thursday afternoon worked. I drove to his office in a brick building on the east side of Columbus, in a neighborhood of insurance companies and accounting firms, and I sat across from a man I had never met in my life. Gerald Harmon was mid-50s, professionally neutral in the way that attorneys who specialize in estate law often become. He had delivered news like this many times and had developed a kind of careful stillness around it that I imagine is a professional necessity. He offered me water. I declined. He opened the folder on his desk, and he began to read. He told me that my mother had retained his services approximately 7 months before her death, that she had come to his office alone, without informing me or my sister Karen, that he had conducted the standard assessments required to establish that she was of sound mind and clear intention, and that she had met every standard without difficulty or hesitation. And then he told me the name of the primary beneficiary, Diane Holloway of Memphis, Tennessee. He said it matter-of-factly, the way you might read a weather report. Diane Holloway of Memphis, Tennessee, was to receive the entirety of Patricia Mercer's estate, the house, the savings account, the retirement funds, the personal property, the jewelry, the car, everything that my mother had spent a lifetime accumulating, everything that I had, without ever articulating it, expected to one day carry forward as the continuation of a family legacy I believed I understood. Karen received a small bequest, the photograph albums, the china set, a handful of sentimental items specifically listed by name. I received a handwritten note, 3 sentences, in my mother's handwriting, on her personal stationery. Michael, I love you more than I have ever been able to say. Please try to understand. I read those 3 sentences probably 15 times in the car after I left Gerald Harmon's office. I sat in the parking lot of that brick building on the east side of Columbus, and I read them over and over, and every time I read them, they said the same impossible thing. Please try to understand. Understand what? I had never heard the name Diane Holloway in my life. Not once. In 48 years of Sunday calls and holiday dinners and summer road trips and birthday cards, and the 10,000 ordinary moments that make up a life shared between a mother and her son, not once had that name come up. Not a reference. Not a mention. Not even a shadow of a suggestion that this person existed and meant something to my mother. And now she had inherited everything. I sat in that parking lot until the sun went down. And when I finally started the car and drove home, I made a decision. I was going to find out who Diane Holloway was. I did not have a plan. I did not have any particular resources or skills. I had a name, a city, and the kind of driven, specific anger that gives a person remarkable focus. It would turn out to be enough. The first thing anyone does in the modern world when they need to find someone is they search. I sat down at my kitchen table with my laptop at 9 o'clock that night, and I typed the name into every search engine I could think of. Diane Holloway, Memphis, Tennessee. What came back was, on the surface, unremarkable. A Facebook profile, mostly private, with a small profile photo showing a woman in her early 60s, warm-faced, standing outside what looked like a church. A LinkedIn page identifying her as a retired registered nurse who had spent her career at a hospital in the Memphis area. A mention in a church newsletter from several years earlier, thanking volunteers who had organized a community food drive. On paper, Diane Holloway was an entirely ordinary woman, the kind of quietly lived, genuinely decent life that does not attract attention and does not invite scrutiny. There was absolutely no apparent connection to my mother. No shared geography. No shared professional history. No mutual acquaintances that I could identify. Nothing that explained why a schoolteacher from Columbus, Ohio, had decided to give this woman everything she owned. But I kept looking, because something, some instinct I could not yet name, told me I was not seeing the whole picture. I want to pause here and tell you something about the process of trying to understand a secret your mother kept from you for 60 years. It is not clean. It does not proceed in a logical, linear direction. You do not find one clue, and then the next clue, and then the answer. What actually happens is that you find fragments. You find pieces that do not fit together the way you expect them to. You find things that seem significant and then turn out to be dead ends, and things that seem insignificant that turn out to be the entire story. In the weeks that followed Gerald Harmon's office, I made calls I should not have had to make. I went through records I should not have had to search. I reached out to people who knew my mother and asked questions that made them deeply uncomfortable, because the questions revealed, by their very existence, that there were things about Patricia Mercer that none of us knew, and that unsettled people who had organized their understanding of her around the assumption that she was exactly who she appeared to be. She was, of course, and she was also something else entirely. About 2 weeks into my search, I went back to my mother's house. Technically, the property now belonged to Diane Holloway, but the estate had not yet been formally transferred, and Gerald Harmon had informed me that Karen and I had 30 days to retrieve any personal items we wanted to keep. I let myself in with the key I had carried on my keychain for 15 years, and I stood in her kitchen for a long time before I could move. The house still smelled like her, like the lavender soap she used, and the particular dusty warm smell of old books, and something I have never been able to name, which is just the smell of home when home is a real place and not just a concept. I was not there to grieve. I had been grieving for 3 weeks, and I had not finished, but I set that aside. I was there to find something. I started in the bedroom. I went through the dresser. I went through the nightstand. I looked under the bed, behind the headboard, inside the closet. And then, on the highest shelf of the closet, pushed to the very back behind her winter coats, I found a plain gray shoebox. No label. No indication of its contents. Just a shoebox that had been pushed as far out of sight as the shelf would allow. Inside the shoebox was a life my mother had never shown any of us. There were letters, dozens of them, handwritten in my mother's careful, looping script, on plain white paper. The earliest dated 1963, the most recent from just 8 months before she died. They were addressed to no one. They did not have a name at the top or a formal salutation. They began, each one of them, with the same 2 words, "My darling." They described, over the course of 60 years, a love that had never been given anywhere to go. A love that had no recipient, no address, no way of traveling from the woman who felt it to the person it was meant for. In the earliest letters, the ones from 1963 and 1964, the writing was different than the handwriting I knew. Shakier, younger, pressed harder into the paper, like the effort of writing required a physical force that the emotional effort of composing the words had already exhausted. In one of those letters, my mother wrote that she thought about the child every single day, that she hoped the child was warm, that she hoped whoever had been given the responsibility of raising her understood what a privilege it was, that she wanted her to know, even though there was no way for her to know, that she had not been let go because she was not wanted. She had been let go because my mother was 19 years old, unmarried, and living in a world that gave her no other choice. There was also, in the shoebox, a hospital wristband, the kind they put on newborns in the maternity ward. It was small and worn. The ink nearly faded to illegibility after 6 decades. But I could still make out the date, April 14th, 1963. Baby girl. Weight, 6 pounds, 4 ounces. And there was a photograph, a small black and white print, the kind taken by hospital staff in that era, showing a young woman in a hospital bed holding a newborn against her chest. The young woman in the photograph was my mother. She was 19 years old. Her expression, in that photograph, is one of the most complete things I have ever seen on a human face. It is not happiness. It is not the soft, uncomplicated joy you expect from a new mother in a photograph. It is something far older and more difficult than joy. It is the expression of a person who knows, in the moment the shutter closes, that they are about to lose something they will never stop missing. I have looked at that photograph many times since I found it. I have never been able to look at it for very long. My mother had a daughter in April of 1963, a daughter born at a Columbus hospital while my mother was 19 years old and unmarried, at a time in American life when being 19 and unmarried and pregnant was not a circumstance that society offered you any particular grace or support. According to the researchers and authors who have documented this period extensively, notably in Fessler, who spent years interviewing women who surrendered children during the baby scoop era, what happened to women like my mother was not, in most cases, a freely made choice. Fessler's research describes women who begged not to give up their children and were told it was not their decision to make. Hospital staff who told mothers their babies had died because they believed a clean lie would be easier to carry than a complicated truth. Families who organized the surrender of grandchildren with a speed and finality that left the mothers no time to process what was happening before it was already done. In some cases, women woke up after delivery and their babies were simply gone. No conversation, no paperwork pressed into their hands, no formal goodbye. Just an absence where a person had been. My mother's sister, my Aunt Helen, who is now 79 and lives in Cincinnati, confirmed, when I finally called her, that this was almost exactly what had happened to Patricia. Your grandmother made the decision, Aunt Helen told me, her voice quiet and careful. Patricia was not asked. She was told. And then it was done. And then we were told never to speak of it again. And we didn't. God help us, we didn't. I need to tell you what happened when I went back to my research after finding that shoebox, because this is where the story began to take a shape I was not prepared for. I went looking for Diane Holloway's birth record. I had her full name, her approximate age, the city she had lived in for decades, and with the help of a professional genealogical researcher I hired through an ancestry research firm, I found it within a week. Diane Holloway, born Diane Patricia Morrison, in Columbus, Ohio, on April 14, 1963. The surname Morrison, my mother's maiden name. The date, the same date on the hospital wristband in the shoebox. I sat with that information for a very long time. I read it. I set it down. I made a cup of coffee and drank it standing at the kitchen counter without tasting it. I sat back down. I read it again. The name on the birth record. The date. The city. All of it matching. All of it pointing in one direction that I had not expected and was not ready for. And that, now that I was looking at it, I could not possibly look away from. Diane Holloway was my mother's daughter. She was my half-sister. She was 61 years old, living in Memphis, Tennessee, working until recently as a registered nurse, and she had been found by my mother approximately 14 months before Patricia died. And my mother had spent those 14 months in a relationship I knew absolutely nothing about, conducted in complete secrecy, in the space between the Sunday phone calls and the holiday dinners, and every ordinary moment of the life I thought I shared with her completely. I want to tell you about what happened next, but first I need to address something, because I think it is important to be honest about the full sequence of my feelings during this period. When the genealogy researcher sent me the birth record and the adoption file, my first reaction was not understanding. It was not compassion. It was not the kind of open-hearted grace that this story, in its final form, perhaps suggests I should have felt. My first reaction was fury. Raw, specific, clarifying fury. I was furious that she had kept this from us. I was furious that she had constructed an entire alternate reality. 14 months of phone calls and video chats and letters with a woman she had never introduced to us, never mentioned, never prepared us for, and had managed it all in the margins of the life she shared with Karen and with me. I was furious that her method of making things right was a legal document delivered after her death, with no context and no explanation, and only 3 sentences in a handwritten note that told me to try to understand something she had never once offered me the information required to understand. I want to be honest about that fury because it was real, and because I think any person who has ever loved someone who kept a significant secret from them will recognize it immediately. You can love someone completely and still be devastated by what they chose not to share with you. Those two things are not in conflict. Around this same time, my sister Karen came to me with something that briefly and significantly changed the direction of my thinking. She had been going through my mother's old phone records, accessible through the estate, and she had found not just the repeated calls to Diane Holloway's Memphis number, which by that point I had already confirmed and could account for. She had also found calls to a second law office, not Gerald Harmon's firm, a different attorney in Cincinnati. Karen's theory was immediate and urgent. She believed someone had taken advantage of our mother during a period of post-surgical vulnerability. Elder financial abuse is not a rare occurrence. It is, in fact, alarmingly common. According to the National Council on Aging, approximately 1 in 10 Americans over the age of 60 experiences some form of elder abuse, and financial exploitation is among the most frequently reported categories. Karen was convinced, with the specific conviction of a grieving daughter who needed an explanation that made the pain make sense, that Diane Holloway had manipulated a recovering, emotionally fragile 73-year-old woman into changing her will. I listened to her. I sat with her theory for 3 days. And for those 3 days, I genuinely believed she might be right. Then I called the Cincinnati attorney's office. The Cincinnati attorney's name was Richard Patel, and what he told me when I called, once I had established who I was and what my connection to the estate was, dismantled Karen's theory entirely and replaced it with something far more complicated and, in some ways, far harder to accept. Richard Patel had not been retained by my mother. He had been retained by Diane Holloway. Diane had hired Richard Patel approximately 13 months before my mother's death, shortly after her initial contact with Patricia, specifically to advise her on what her legal and ethical obligations were in this situation, and how to ensure that any relationship she developed with her biological mother did not create legal complications for Patricia or for our family. Diane had, according to Richard Patel, been deeply concerned about exactly the kind of accusation that Karen had just leveled. She had wanted, from the very beginning, to make sure that no one could ever claim she had pressured or manipulated a vulnerable elderly woman. And when Patricia had told Diane about the will, when she had told Diane what she intended to do with her estate, Diane had actively tried to talk her out of it. She had told my mother she did not want the money, that finding her was sufficient, that being known and acknowledged and loved, even for 14 short months, was worth more than any house or savings account or piece of jewelry. My mother had listened to all of that and had told Diane, with a clarity and determination that Richard Patel described as entirely unambiguous, that she was going to do this, that she had made up her mind a long time ago about what she owed this woman, and that she was not going to die without paying it. I called Diane Holloway on a Sunday afternoon. I had had her phone number for almost 2 weeks before I used it. I had written it on a piece of paper and put it in my wallet and carried it around while I tried to work out what I was going to say. There is no preparation adequate to that particular phone call. There is no script. You cannot rehearse. Hello. I believe you are my half-sister, and I am calling because my mother left you my inheritance, and I am trying to understand why. You simply dial and wait and hope that the person on the other end has the grace to meet you where you are. She picked up on the second ring. Her voice was warm and measured. The voice of a woman who had clearly spent a career in healthcare learning how to communicate with people who were frightened and uncertain. The first thing she said to me, before I had said anything beyond my name, was, "Michael, I have been hoping you would call." I did not know what to do with that. I said, "You have?" And she said, "Yes. Your mother told me so much about you. She talked about you all the time. She would have wanted you to call." What Diane told me over the course of that first phone call, a conversation that lasted 2 hours and 40 minutes, which I know because I checked my phone afterward the way you check your odometer after a drive that felt longer than you expected, dismantled almost every assumption I had been operating from since the day I sat in Gerald Harmon's office. Diane had found my mother through a DNA ancestry platform. She had submitted her DNA to one of the major genealogical databases out of a general curiosity about her biological origins. She had known since childhood that she was adopted, had known it openly and without drama, because her adoptive parents had told her early and told her honestly. She had not been searching for Patricia specifically. She had been searching, in the vague and unstructured way that many adoptees search, for a sense of where she came from. The platform flagged my mother as a close maternal match. Diane had sent a message to the email address attached to the account, a message she described to me as careful and low pressure. She had written it to leave my mother a clear and graceful exit if she did not want contact, because she understood that the situation was complicated in ways she could not fully see from her side of it. My mother wrote back in 2 hours, 3 pages, single-spaced, and the first sentence of that response was, "I have been waiting for this message since the day you were born." According to Diane, those 14 months were the most significant and transformative of the final chapter of my mother's life. They talked on the phone several times a week. They video called on Sunday evenings, which, I now realize, is why the Sunday phone calls I made to my mother began getting shorter in that final year, something I attributed to fatigue and depression and all the things a doctor had suggested might be affecting her post-surgery. She was not tired. She was not depressed. She was managing 2 lives simultaneously, the life she had always lived with us, and the new, urgent, time-pressured life she had just been given the chance to begin with Diane, and she was doing it alone, without any of us knowing, because she had decided that the way to manage her guilt was to contain it rather than distribute it. Whether that was the right decision is something I have thought about every single day since Diane told me, and I still do not have a clean answer. What I have is a complicated one. My mother had carried this secret for 60 years. She had carried it through her marriage and through raising Karen and me and through 31 years in a third-grade classroom and through my father's death and through her own widowhood and through every single moment of a full and genuine and loving life. She had become so practiced at carrying it that releasing it, even partially, even carefully, even in the context of a relationship that had begun to heal it, was something she did not know how to do in the open. So she did it in the space she could manage, quietly, privately, and then she arranged for the rest of it to happen after she was gone, when she would not have to watch the people she loved absorb the impact. Diane told me what my mother had said about the will, and she told me what she had said in response, and I want to share all of it with you because I think it is the part of this story that matters most. My mother had told Diane about the estate approximately 3 months into their relationship. She had told her clearly and directly what she planned to do, and she had explained her reasoning in terms that Diane described as both heartbreaking and completely logical once you understood the emotional architecture of what Patricia had been carrying. She said, "I took 60 years from you. I cannot give those years back. I cannot give you the childhood you would have had, or the Christmases, or the mother who was present, or any of it. The only thing I have left that is mine to give is what I leave behind. And I intend to leave it to you, because you are the one who has been going without." Diane pushed back. She pushed back hard and sincerely, by her own account. She told Patricia she had had a good life, a genuinely good life, with loving adoptive parents and a career she was proud of and children of her own, and all the things that constitute a life that is full rather than empty. She told my mother that the gift of being found, of being known, of hearing from her own mother's voice that she had been loved and missed every single day for 6 decades, that was worth more than any material thing my mother could leave behind. My mother listened to all of it. And then she said, with the same quiet, steady certainty that I recognize as one of her defining characteristics, "I know, and I am still doing this." I need to stop here and tell you what my mother had said about me specifically, because Diane shared it during that first phone call, and I have thought about it every day since. Patricia had told Diane that she had 2 children from her marriage, Michael and Karen, and she had described both of us in detail. She had shown Diane photographs. She had told Diane about my job and my marriage and my kids, the way a proud mother describes a child she believes she has done right by. And she had said, in explaining her decision about the estate, "Michael is strong. He has always been strong. He takes care of himself, and he always has, and he is going to be all right. He gets that from me, and I mean that as a compliment." Diane has been going without a foundation her whole life. She built everything she has on ground that had a hole in the middle of it. I want to fill that hole before I go. I am not going to pretend that hearing that was easy. It was not easy. I understand the logic of it. I genuinely do, and I have understood it more completely with every month that has passed since Diane told me. But understanding something and being at peace with it are 2 different processes, and they do not happen on the same timeline. What happened 4 months after my mother's death, I did not see coming. I had been processing everything slowly. The revelation, the phone call with Diane, the conversations with Karen, the long and difficult work of rebuilding a relationship with my mother's memory that could hold both the woman I had always known and the woman I had just discovered. I had not contested the will. I had looked into it, out of a sense of responsibility to myself and to Karen. I hired an attorney for a consultation, and the attorney told me that contesting would be expensive, time-consuming, deeply unlikely to succeed given the evidence of Patricia's sound mind at the time of signing, and would almost certainly leave all of us worse off than we already were, financially and emotionally. So I let it go, or I tried to. Karen was harder to bring to that conclusion and took longer, but she got there. We were, both of us, in that painful middle space between what we had lost and whatever came next when Diane contacted me again. She had liquidated the estate. She had sold the house on Carmel Road in Westerville where I had grown up, the house where the maple tree in the backyard had a scar in its bark from where I had carved my initials at age 9, where my mother had grown her garden for 30 years, sold. The proceeds from the house and the bank accounts and the personal property came to a total that she then divided into 3 equal parts. She kept 1/3 for herself. She transferred 1/3 to Karen, and she transferred 1/3 to me. When I called her and asked her why, I had not expected this, had made no claim, had given her no reason to do it. She said something I have turned over in my mind hundreds of times since. She said, because it was the right thing to do, and because your mother loved you, and she would have wanted you taken care of, even if she expressed that love in a way that did not make it clear. And because you are my brothers. Both of you. My brothers. That word. She said it without hesitation, without qualification. The way you say something that you have already decided is true. Diane and I have met in person twice now. The first time was at a restaurant in Columbus, a neutral location that Diane had suggested because she is apparently thoughtful in that particular way, the kind of person who considers logistics from the other person's perspective before her own. She was already seated when I arrived, and when she stood up to greet me, there was a moment, just a moment, where something in her face stopped me. She looks like my mother around the eyes. Not identically. Not in a way that would be obvious to someone who was not looking for it, but in the way that certain expressions travel genetically through a family, the way a particular kind of warmth or a particular tilt of the head passes from one generation to the next without anyone deciding it should. She looks like Patricia around the eyes. I told her that. She cried. I was not far from crying myself, and I am not a man who cries easily. We sat for 4 hours. She told me about her childhood, the adoptive family who had raised her with honesty and love, the mother and father who had told her early and gently that she had come to them by a different road than most children, and that the road did not change what she was to them. She told me about her career in nursing, about her own children, about the years she had spent with a low-grade awareness of an absence at the center of her that she could not quite identify or address. Not emptiness exactly. She was clear about that. She had a full life. She was not a woman defined by what she had not been given. But there was something missing, and she had known it was missing. And when the DNA match to my mother appeared on her screen, and she read my mother's 3-page response, she said it was like a door opening in a room she had spent 60 years navigating in the dark. We talk on the phone regularly now. She has met Karen once, briefly, and I think that relationship will take longer. Karen is still working through her own version of this, which is different from mine in ways that I respect and do not try to rush. Diane has sent me photographs of her adoptive family, of her children, of her career, of a life fully and well lived. And I have sent her photographs of my mother, of Patricia as a young woman, of the mother I knew for 54 years. Diane studies them the way you study something you have been waiting a long time to see, with the kind of attention that is not casual and not quick. She told me that she looked at a photo of my mother at 35, at a 4th of July barbecue, laughing at something someone off camera had said, for 45 minutes before she put it down. I understood that completely. I have spent a long time lately looking at photographs of my mother with the same quality of attention, trying to see both women in the same frame. The woman I always knew, and the woman I am still getting to know. They are the same person. They were always the same person. And that is the part that I am still, slowly, learning how to hold. I want to tell you what I have learned from all of this, because I did not go through a year of grief and discovery and anger and unexpected grace just to arrive at the end with nothing to say. The first thing, and this is the one I feel most urgently about, is this. The conversations you are avoiding are not going to go away. They are going to wait. They are patient in a way that living people are not, because they do not have a deadline. They will wait until you are gone, and then they will surface on their own schedule, in their own way, with no one present to provide context or cushioning or the explanation that would have made all the difference. My mother carried her secret for 60 years because the world she was 19 and made her believe she had no other option. But she carried it for the last decade of her life, when the world had changed entirely, when Karen and I were adults, when she had every opportunity to sit us down and say, "There is something I need to tell you," because she had been carrying it so long that she no longer knew how to put it down. Do not let that happen to you. Whatever it is, whatever the thing is that you are carrying, find a way to say it while there is still time to say it face to face, in the same room, while you can still see how the person receives it and respond to what you see. A legal document is not a conversation. A 3-sentence note is not an explanation. The people who love you deserve the full version. Give it to them while you can. The second thing I have learned is about the particular weight of shame, not the kind of shame that is deserved, but the kind that is imposed. My mother was 19 years old. She was a girl at a university who had made a mistake, in the way that 19-year-old human beings make mistakes, and the world she lived in responded to that mistake not with support or compassion or practical guidance, but with a swift and permanent erasure. They took her daughter, and they told her to move on. And the shame of that, the shame of having been treated as though what she felt did not matter, as though the child she had carried and loved and lost was a problem to be managed rather than a person to be grieved. That shame attached itself to her and stayed for 60 years. It shaped the way she built her life. It shaped what she told and what she withheld. It shaped the space inside her that none of us, not even the people she loved most, were ever fully allowed to enter. Shame is not a vault. I want you to hear that clearly because I believe it to be true in a way that goes beyond my mother's particular story. Shame does not protect the people you love from the truth. It protects the truth from ever being healed. And when you are gone, it opens. The third thing, and this is the one I keep returning to, the one that has changed the way I move through the world, is that the most painful things people do to us are not always done in malice. My mother did not change her will to punish me. She did not construct 14 months of secrecy because she loved me less than she loved Diane. She did all of it from a place of love for Diane, the child she had lost before she had the language to grieve her, and love for me, the son she believed was strong enough to absorb this and eventually understand it. She was right about that. It took longer than she probably hoped. It hurt more than she probably allowed herself to imagine in those months of making her plans. But she was right. I am strong enough, and I do understand. Not completely, not without residual grief or unanswered questions, but enough. Enough to sit across a table from a 61-year-old woman who has my mother's eyes and call her family. Enough to look at a photograph of Patricia and Mercer and see the whole of her. The warmth and the secrecy and the love and the failure and the 60-year wait and the 14-month sprint toward righting a wrong she had never stopped knowing was hers, and love her anyway. Entirely, without reservation. That is what I have, and it turns out it is enough. I want to hear from you, and I mean that genuinely. This story, Patricia's story, Diane's story, and yes, my story, is not as rare as most of us would like to believe. The baby scoop era alone produced an estimated 1.5 million surrendered children in the United States. 1.5 million. Most of those women went home and built lives around the silence the way you build a room around a load-bearing wall, working carefully around something structural that you are never supposed to touch. Most of those children grew up with a version of Diane's particular quiet absence, that low-grade awareness of a door in themselves that they had never been given a key to. And most of the families who were downstream of all of that, the children who came after, the siblings who never knew, the husbands and wives who loved someone carrying something they were never shown, had no idea any of it existed until it arrived in the mail from an attorney's office, or surfaced in a DNA database, or was found in a shoebox behind a winter coat on a closet shelf. If any part of this story felt familiar to you, if you recognized something in Patricia, or in Diane, or in the particular disorientation of discovering that the person you knew most completely was also someone you had never been allowed to fully see, I want you to tell me. Leave it in the comments. Not because I am asking for drama or confession or anything you are not comfortable sharing, but because these stories matter, and the more we tell them, the more clearly we begin to understand that secrecy is not protection. It is delay. Did you see this coming? At what moment in this story did you understand who Diane Holloway really was? Leave your answer below. I read every single comment, and I want to know where you were in the story when it clicked. And if you have your own experience, a family secret that came to light after a death, a revelation that changed the way you understood someone you thought you knew, a moment when the floor shifted under a version of your life you believed was solid, share it. You do not need to share the details. You can simply say, yes, I know what this feels like. Because a lot of people watching this right now are sitting with something similar, and they need to know they are not the only ones. I thought Patricia's story was something. I promise you, you are not ready for what comes next. Subscribe now so you do not miss it. And to everyone watching from wherever you are in the world tonight, thank you for staying. Thank you for listening. These are real stories about real people, and they deserve to be told, and you deserve to hear them.